Hello and welcome to this week's lecture. This week we're going to be talking about collection development and evaluation of reference collections. And reference, I'm also including general nonfiction because that can be used for resources to answer questions, reference questions, and research. So first of all, you really should have policies in place for your whole collection. The collection development policies help with challenges to books. If you have articulated guidelines for choosing books, then it helps you defend the choices that you made. So you should have one that addresses the fiction and nonfiction collections, and also if you have separate reference collection, you should have a section of the policy that also concerns and addresses how you choose your reference material. If you're not going to have a separate print reference collection, you might talk about how you choose your databases and curated websites and other material like that. I'm not going to go into the policies too much because you're going to go, it's further developed in the management class, but I do want to mention it here as I do in the selecting lit class because it's important to have these policies. If you have a written policy for when you have a book challenge, it helps to have a policy to refer to as to why you chose to put a book in your collection, and then also have a policy with how challenges are handled. And if you don't think that there's challenges to reference material, I'm going to put up, if I can find it again, there was an article on somebody challenging the EBSCO databases because they were able to go into a school library EBSCO database and somehow go into the regular databases, and they found something that they said was pornographic, which as the comment in the article was, I'm sure that when kids are looking for pornographic material, the first place they go to is the EBSCO databases to find them, or any kind of databases. So if you have a challenge with your reference or any material, if you have not only a policy for how you decide what to put in your collection, but also policy for how challenges can be handled in terms of filling out a form, which has them articulate their objections, indicate if they've read the book or not, and there's other questions that you can have in policies that help with the reconsideration of challenged material. And it can help in several ways. One person may decide if they have to do a written challenge rather than just stomping in there and saying, I want this book out, and having you take it out. If they actually have to do a written challenge, put their name on something, it may make them think whether they want to do that. And if they do decide to go forward with it, you have procedures to follow in terms of where it goes next, who makes the decision, etc. So this is all something to think about with collection development. Castle, in her book, Reference and Information Services in the 21st Century, suggests the policies contain the following: an introduction, what the scope and size of your collection is going to be, what formats you're going to have, what types of reference materials, responsibilities of the staff and others for selection, who is doing the selecting of the material, criteria for selection, assessment, and weeding. We're going to talk about weeding, funding, and resource sharing. It's also good to know who you have in the policy information about how you're going to share resources to save money. So if we're looking at individual books and wanting to evaluate an individual reference book, you want to look at things like the arrangement of the book, the authority of the book, the accuracy, the scope, the style, the type, the usefulness. So the arrangement of the book could be, does it have Are the pages clearly laid out? Is it laid out in sections? Is it arranged in a way that makes sense for the age of the students that will be using it? Is it arranged attractively? When you look at the book, is it appealing? And does it make it easy to use? Authority is who publishes, writes, or edits the book, and what's their reputation. As you get to know more books, you can get to know the reputation of just by looking at a bunch of books, you'll say, yeah, I know those. I usually like, they usually put a lot, like there's one series, Scientists in the Field, which is one of my favorite middle grade series by Houghton Mifflin. Yes, I think it's Houghton Books for Young Readers, maybe it is. And when I see that series and I see that publisher, I could pretty much guarantee it's going to be a high quality book. Now, I still might want to look at the book, but I know that I have that particular series and publisher has a reputation for carefully thought out books that are well edited and authoritative. Because they're well edited and because you can tell that the facts have been checked. I mean, you just can tell by the quality of the book. And accuracy, if you find mistakes in the book, and this happens, it's hard when you can't be versed in every subject that you have books in the library about. But if there's an obvious mistake in a book, obviously you don't want to keep it, or you want to address that somehow, and you want to see, okay, if I found this error in this book, am I going to find it in other books like in that series or by that publisher? So accuracy is really important, and accuracy sometimes is affected by age, which gets into the weeding part of it. The scope is the breadth and depth of the coverage within a book. So what type of coverage on a particular subject does your school need? Do you need something, and this also can depend on what else you have in your collection. Do you have a lot of books that cover all of World War I, but none that cover some individual topics about World War I, like them using gas? That was like, it was the first time that different kinds of weapons were used, and trench warfare, and World War I is probably a terrible example because I don't know much about World War I. But you can decide how much coverage you need on a topic and whether that book covers it broadly, which you need some books that just do a broad overview of a topic and maybe not so deep, and then you might need some other books that balance out the collection by looking at something narrowly but more deeply. You can look at the style and the typeface, the size, the readability. The DK format that I've been talking about works for some needs but not for others. Is the size of the book itself too big for the age of the students that'll be using it? Is the color useful or distracting? Is it useful in terms of fitting into your collection and something students will enjoy? So these are all things you can think about when you're evaluating individual books to purchase for your collection. And then you need to evaluate your overall collection. One way you can do this is through collection analysis, which you can, if you have a system like Destiny or some other system in which your books are all entered, you can often run a collection analysis, and it'll give you the age and currency of your books. So you can look at what the average age of your books are overall. And this is important when you look at, in particular Dewey numbers, such as in the computer, which I think is in the zeros. You obviously don't want very old. Matter of fact, I don't even know if you would buy any computer books. I remember when computers were first coming out, there were all of these handbooks and computers for dummies, but now there's so much online that you probably wouldn't even buy a book. But if you found that you had a computer section and the average age was 2000, doesn't sound that old, but it really is old for computers or software or whatever, for the most part. If you want to, if you're looking for a book that's about a historical book on computers, but your job in a school library collection is not to have books that are there because they were interesting for what they were at one point. You need to have a very usable collection because you usually don't have a lot of space. So the collection analysis can tell you how old your collection is, how the number of books in each section, and you can kind of get an idea if you run a shelf list, the number of the balance of the books that you have, and where you have gaps. If you run a Dewey run and find that you have nothing in if you're in an elementary school and you have nothing in the section that dinosaurs are in, you probably have a real big gap there, because the elementary students are almost always interested in dinosaurs. But you can see where gaps are. So collection analysis can help you give you an overall view of your collection. You also want to look at your collection in terms of accessibility for users. Do you have books that are the appropriate age level for your users and the appropriate subject topics for your users? How does your collection look overall? The breadth and the depth of your collection, again, as with the scope, you want to know if you've got assignments every year on a particular topic, you want to have both breadth and depth in that topic. If you have some occasional interest in a topic, or you think it's something kids should know about, you maybe don't need to have 10 books about it, but you might need to have one book about it. And of course, age appropriateness is going to depend on your users and knowing if your collection is appropriate to your users. I have some examples in the slide about interesting age appropriateness in books that have been found in elementary school collections. So looking at individual books for the quality, and then looking at your overall collection for the quality are both things that you need to do. And the collection analysis, if you can have that done through whatever system you're using, it can be very useful for evaluating your overall collection. So once you've run that report and kind of taken a look at your collection, you may decide that you need to do some weeding. And weeding was always a really hard thing for me, because I am somebody who has a hard time getting rid of things, but it really is important to weed your collection for a variety of reasons, including space considerations. If you are tight on space, if your collection is jammed into the shelf so nobody can pull things in and out, it's not going to be used, so you need more space. It saves time in terms of looking through books that are not appropriate, or trying to sifting through the inappropriate books to find appropriate books, and it makes the collection more appealing. This is a good resource, and I've given you a link to it, a weeding manual for modern libraries. It's actually done by the Texas State Library, and it has a method for working through weeding, its purposes, plans for implementing weeding, and if you do a little bit of continuous weeding, where you're not saying I'm going to do all my weeding in one afternoon or 1 week, but can take a section a week or something, then it also can help keep your collection fresh. One of the problems that you can run into occasionally with weeding is getting rid of the books, and you have to kind of be creative about how to get rid of books. some places, I was speaking with somebody who just went into a new library, a librarian I know just went into a new school library, weeded a bunch of books that were really in need of weeding, and but has to have, because the books are purchased with school money, she has to have it signed off on before she can get rid of the books. And you've got to be careful where you don't, if you're throwing away books, that you don't throw them where people can see them, because then they think you're just wasting money. They don't really understand what we're going to talk about next when we talk about what to weed and why you need to weed things, and they just see books in the trash and think that it's horrible. And there's some books that are, if you're weeding a collection that's not, and you're taking out stuff that's not quite as old, maybe you can pass it on to somebody else, but there's some stuff that you just shouldn't pass on. Doesn't matter how needy they are, it doesn't belong in any collection. So there can be challenges to getting rid of books after weeding. That needs to be created. So what to weed? What are we going to look? What's Crew going to tell us? Shorthand. Outdated books, which contain inaccurate information. It's really important to get rid of outdated books. And I'll show you an example of a good example at the end of this. There's charts, I believe, in the Crew for suggested reference lifespans. Something like, I don't know, World War II is probably not going to go outdated as quickly as information on scientific breakthroughs. So it's important to get rid of outdated, inaccurate. They can be the same, because when Pluto became not a planet, it kind of knocked out, any books we had, particularly on Pluto, should have been pulled. I hesitated to pull immediately all of the books that covered all the planets, because it was just too hard to replace all of them. But it would have been something that you needed to do. Of course, now they've decided it's a dwarf planet, so you need to update again. But there's things certainly that can be much more, new discoveries you need to put in, things that they thought were okay and now aren't. Anything that becomes outdated because new information is available should be taken out. Bias, anything with biased, racist, sexist terminology or views, as we learn, as we become more aware, we can go back and look at something that might have been purchased at a previous time and realize it's probably not what we want in our library, even though it might be the only thing on the topic. If it's biased or racist, you want to get rid of it. Unneeded duplicates, if you need space in your library, like there might, this happens a lot with fiction, especially in public libraries. The newest bestseller comes out, they buy 10 copies in order to satisfy demand or whatever, depending on the size of the branch. And then as the next bestseller comes out and there's no longer the waiting list for it, you need to get rid of some of the duplicates. I don't think that happens probably quite as much in school libraries, unless you buy a classroom set that's no longer being used. You might want to keep one for your collection and get rid of the other. Worn out books, ragged, unable to be repaired, dirty, stained, really overly marked up. Those things should be gotten rid of, even if it's really hard to do that sometimes, because you say somebody might want to read this, but people don't want those unattractive books. It makes the collection look unattractive, makes overcrowded shelves. If you have overcrowded shelves with really dirty books, it just is not appealing and people don't want to browse. So even kids don't really want to browse through that. Dated cover art, just not appealing, is going to turn kids off. And not used. You can be very selective about this. Not used. Some people run reports. We used to get what was called the Dusty Book Report, which meant anything that hadn't been circulated in, I think, 5 years. And you can run these reports with whatever parameters I think that you want, depending on your system that you're in. I would not just immediately pull 5 years and get rid of them. I would pull and look at them what we did is actually had a uh, the ones that we thought were worth keeping, we actually put out on a shelf face out, and a lot of them went, and then they had circulations, but they might have just gotten forgotten. If you think it's worthwhile, you can book talk it, or make sure it's seen somehow. But if it's just not used in a long time, then it's just might not just be right for your collection. So you can keep this in mind through the musty guidelines. If it's misleading, if it's ugly, if it's been superseded, there's new information. Trivial, meaning it's just not adding to the value of your collection. Irrelevant, or maybe obtained elsewhere. I think the first three are the most important: misleading, ugly, and superseded. And it's not because I think ugly books shouldn't, not that you want to always judge a book by its cover, but if the cover's dirty and torn off and the pages are falling out, then you might want to judge the book by its cover. If you're on this may be obtained elsewhere, if you're on the fence and you can get a library loan, or send the kids to the public library, or somehow get a hold of the book elsewhere, then that could be a deciding factor. Irrelevant is it hasn't been used in 10 years, so it obviously is irrelevant. Other related reasons to read. This is a great website. It's called, no, it's not called Oops. It's called Awful Library Books. And what they do is people submit books to them that have been found on library shelves. They also do some books that they've come across elsewhere that are still in collections. So this one was found in an active public library youth collection. So that means they found it actually in a library collection, and this was posted on June 2013. So this 1951 book about space travel was found in the collection, and it's just too old. It's just it's great if you have a library that focuses on collecting historical children's books, then this would be perfect for it. But in a collection that needs to be actively used by students to do research, this is not for you, especially when you have space constraints in terms of not having enough books. This one is just dated. There's nothing particularly wrong with the information in this, but it's just pretty dated, and you're probably not going to get too many kids that are going to kind of look at this and say, yeah, this is the book I want to take out. Unfortunately, it can be something that's older. This one was in a cleanup this was in a high school library. So 2013, this was still in a high school library from 1991. So first of all, I think I'm trying to think when he died. Music's Living Legend, if that was still in the collection, not such a great subtitle. And just it's old. It just isn't going to be useful. Have somebody sending snail mail to his address. It just is not going to be, it's not something you want. If the assignment is to read a biography about a famous person, it's not going to be useful because it's not up to date. If it's just for their own pleasure, it's also not going to be useful because they're not really learning anything relevant. It's just not up to date. These also were in a collection. So 2013, she was pulling books for Michigan Statehood Day and found this Discover Michigan, which the last published date, it was originally, I guess this Discover Michigan was 1981. This one, My Story of Michigan Geography, which actually has some really cool artwork on the front, but is just not, it belongs in a collection of old children's books that has really cool artwork on the front, that they're archived for people studying children's literature. But revised 1951 doesn't belong. Just and the geography has changed, and it's just too old and giving kids misleading information. This one was in the elementary library, which is kind of interesting. So this is again 2013. So it's a 1980 book on disco dancing, talking about disco places that you would go. I mean, I don't know why this would have ever been purchased for an elementary school library, unless sometimes what does happen is, you know, maybe this was a K through 7 library at one point, and they moved out the upper grades, and this book just got left. It should have been weeded a long time ago, way before 2013. And as she says in the comments here, the submitter, let's see, she says, whereas the books focus on the disco lifestyle, which probably died around the time this book was published, so it wasn't even relevant for that long, from 1980. So definitely get rid of stuff like this. Oops. And this one is a good example of biased and racist language. This is Jim Catfish Hunter, 2017. She weeded it from an urban elementary school library. And this basically, in the introduction, it says a professional baseball player is somewhat like a slave, which is probably not a great comparison to use. So most kids are probably not going to know who Jim Catfish Hunter is, and are not going to be wanting to pick this particular biography off and to do their reports on, or even to read randomly. And on top of that, it's just because it's outdated, we wouldn't use that language anymore to compare to slavery. It's just not a good comparison to make. It's a good thing to weed. It would be good to get rid of. And as it says here, you know, Babe Ruth you want to keep in the collection for a long time. Catfish Hunter, maybe not. Maybe somebody who's really into sports will like him, but there's a good possibility that it's not going to be the best thing to keep in the library. And finally, I want to talk about your discussion on Wikipedia versus World Book. And the point of this, which several of you were able to, several of you mentioned, is just to see what these different encyclopedias look like and who you might use them for. And as Natalie and Nicole and several other you mentioned, that you may have to use different databases based on the needs of the student, and you need to select the appropriate database for the search. So many of you noted that Wikipedia often had more in-depth articles. I think it was Pamela who noted the vocabulary in World Book is more appropriate for younger children, and Betsy said that it might have too much information for elementary school children. So your Wikipedia is definitely skewed toward older readers. Patty, I thought you had a good point about the frustration of students when they can't find. How do you want? You guys were frustrated in doing this search, and so you got into the head of students and how they can be frustrated when they can't find what they want. Amanda, I thought it was interesting you pointed out several different people getting the credit for the first sewing machine. I think how just getting the credit because he patented it makes sense. And it's interesting when you read more about inventions, how so many firsts wind up not being the work of just one person or wind up being contested. I mean, even the Wright brothers, listen to David McCullough's book, and he downplays it a bit, but there were people, especially over in Europe, who also said that they might have flown first. So and everybody doesn't, and everybody builds on the work of somebody else. Tracy had a good point about cross-referencing information, finding it in more than one source, and not just a source, finding information in more than one source. So you're verifying information by finding it in more than one source, and also expanding perhaps what kind of information you find. And not just one source that's repeated in multiple places. So sometimes you go looking for a confirmation of a fact, and you just keep finding that all of the sources point back to one particular originating quote or description, and you want to find something that corroborates that doesn't just repeat it you can say it came from two different places, but the origin is one particular quote. Michael, no offense over the critique of the World Book. I'm not partial to it. I just wanted you to compare two different kinds of encyclopedias. It sounds like a lot of your classmates agreed with you. I am not in love with World Book either, but I know a lot of people use it, and it's available in a lot of places. Patty mentioned starting with Wikipedia to get a general base of knowledge, and I think that's a perfect use of Wikipedia. Somebody else mentioned using the references at the bottom. Those can be great places to go for additional information. You click on the reference, and if they've quoted it in the article, then you can go there to find out more information. And Dillis on acetone, do I want to know why you know the most prevalent way to produce acetone? Very interesting. I thought your point was very good about why are they having the second most preferred way rather than the first most preferred way. And I bet you could find that if you went and looked at who was editing the page when and how that has changed over time. Could be a very interesting fight behind the scenes there. Michael had a good point about Wikipedia being edited 24/7 and World Book Online not being able to compete. And you could only do that kind of editing if it's going to be the open source, anybody can edit kind of thing that Wikipedia is. World Book is not going to have the money to be able to compete, which is why I think that Wikipedia is a great place to start. If you have the right level student, wouldn't put an elementary school student into Wikipedia, but certainly a high school student should be able to handle, even middle school student, depending on the topic, should be able to handle Wikipedia as a place to start. You can't search about a thing without knowing anything about it. So if you need to search on a topic, one of your topics that I would have known nothing about, and I just had that word, I'm going, by reading in Wikipedia or even in World Book, I'm going to get other keywords and more vocabulary that I can use to increase my knowledge and do more searching on it. Roberta, very interesting that Wikipedia redirects makerspaces to hackerspaces, because you would really think that makerspaces would have their own entry. I did see an entry for library makerspaces, but makerspaces are bigger than just library, so Wikipedia seems to be a little behind on that one. I guess nobody's interested enough to edit it on Wikipedia. I also want to mention Google versus Wikipedia versus World Book. Wikipedia and World Book are both encyclopedias, where Google is a search engine. So EBSCO or Academic Search Complete, and I apologize because I keep saying Academic Search Premier, Academic Search Complete, and using those interchangeably. I think it's listed, it used to be one and now it's the other, and I can't keep them straight. So they both mean the same thing. So Academic Search, whatever it is a curated list of articles and other resources, whereas Wikipedia and World Book are encyclopedias, so more a curated, although they've begun including articles in World Book, whereas Google is just a search engine which is going to return all kinds of things. They really serve different purposes. And Google and World Book Online are different, and you really wouldn't use them for the same type of thing. I was glad to see multiple comments from more people this time. I really appreciate when you guys go in and comment on each other's original comments and add to them, and give us more information and have a discussion, which is what we want on our discussion board. So thank you very much, and I'll see you on the discussion board. Thanks.